Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Copshop. So, with this movie, you're to not really, you're to get people to kind of tell you who they are, but a lot of stuff is left up into mystery. A lot of things isn't to exactly understand. It's just enjoy the ride kind of film. So, I think that this is a solid okay to good kind of ballpark in that area kind of film. Um because I'm not kind of sure I would say watch the film, it's a one-off experience, and cuz I don't see people watching this over and over and over again. I've seen movies like Assault on Precinct 13, and I would say uh that's kind of familiar territory to this movie. And in that movie there's a lot more going on, and there's a lot more interesting things happening in that movie than this one, but it kind of feels somewhat like a similar kind of movie, because what ends up happening in a very teeing up fashion, we end up having Teddy, who's to be this guy who's otherwise having Teddy scrambling because people are after him. People are trying to kill him. Professionals are trying to kill him. So Teddy decides that he's going to go off and try to get himself arrested to end up in this sheriff's prison cell, in this kind of local prison and whatever. And so Teddy naturally assumes, oh, hey, man, I'll be protected by going here. I think I'll be fine. And then we end up finding out, yeah, not so much. Really, it quickly comes down to the fact of, these people getting caught off guard. They're unprepared with a guy with a machine gun, or kind of just heavy artillery just kind of coming into this place and blasting through everywhere. And because this is just some local sheriff's place, it's not some uh, like actual prison kind of thing where you would have guys with machine guns and sniper rifles and all kinds of stuff just kind of waiting for something to happen, um, or someone to escape or whatever. Anyways, but this movie has this kind of surprise kind of element where eventually the further and further and further you go along in this movie, you're like, oh, hey, this is kind of interesting because it's like a surprise elemental thing. Okay, Gerard Butler is kind of really cool in this film. I really like this character. um I really like the fact that it seems that a lot of these people who, even when it seems like they're randomly added in this movie, have a connection with one another, or one another knows one another, and they're like, hey, let's catch up, hey, how are things? And I'm just like, okay, that's so weird. um I like the fact that there is this kind of slow build to this film, but eventually towards the end, there's this big escalation of things. Uh, but yeah, I think that's all that I have to say about this movie in a very uh, cryptic but teeing it up kind of sense. Because there's really not also much to say about this film, but just kind of wait for the build up. And so there's a lot of just points of dialogue, which not everything just because I also watched this in a bootleg variation of it. I didn't go through and actually watch it in theaters, because why would I? Because I kind of knew what to expect from this film, to just be okay, this is going to be another kind of one-off kind of thing. Just kind of wait till it eventually goes in some streaming something somewhere, because that's what tends to happen with a lot of these kinds of movies, in all brutal honesty. But anyways, with that said, let's go into that double five time territory. Let's go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you spoil this movie. So what ends up happening is we end up I think we mainly focus on one of the uh, deputies of this uh, sheriff's office, and this girl is to be Valerie Young. So her and her sheriff, it ends up finding we end up finding out in the beginning of this movie that this guy is to have a birthday gift for his daughter, and she's to be 21 years old, and he ends up giving her a gun for her birthday. It's like, okay, that seems like a weird gift. But then it seems that also Valerie is to be wielding this old fashioned like cowboy western kind of gun. And it seems like a lot of people have that kind of thing about them where they want to just be this like old gunslinger, instead of having to wear the most up to date kind of weaponry, or a lot of these people don't want to come in here with James Bond guns or whatever, where they're kind of they just want to be these old western style gunslinger kind of people. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's nice, but that's to also tell that eventually these people probably don't get all that busy all that often, or maybe just the fact that these people are eventually going to become hilariously unprepared for things. So going in here, we eventually have this sheriff and this deputy going off because I guess there was to be, some fighting or some riot or something like that that kind of broke out right around this wedding. And so all of a sudden, Teddy comes flying in and punches the deputy. And so the deputy goes and takes her taser out and shocks Teddy and drops him. And so they end up arresting Teddy for assaulting an officer. So he ends up getting arrested because he's like, yeah, that's what I wanted to do anyways. I wanted to go to prison. But here's the goofy thing. Immediately once this guy goes to prison, he's like, well, can I check my cell phone? Can I just do that quickly? I just want to make sure that someone didn't call me. It's like, dude, you got arrested. You can't just do that. You can't have your cell phone on you in prison. That was a mistake that you made. So, so eventually Teddy is to make his phone call, and he ends up trying to call his wife and his son to just hey, hey, hopefully you're getting these messages. Hopefully you're going to pick up soon. Hopefully you're going to know where I'm at. But Teddy is to say, get the heck out of there. Wherever you are, just, run off. So Teddy is to go into this prison, and then all of a sudden there evidently is to be some other police officers that ended up finding a guy named Bob Verdick, who they didn't know who he was, so they end up just calling him a John Doe at first. And they say that he was drunk in public, or they just said that he was DUI. So they end up arresting him, booking him, and evidently there is to be this one cell for drunken people and another cell for sober people. So we end up finding out that John Doe Bob is in this cell with some other guy. So eventually what ends up happening is that Teddy all of a sudden starts moving back and forth in his cell, and we weirdly have this Bob guy who ends up walking back and forth in this cell also. and Teddy's like, oh, is he copying me? Is he following me? What is going on here? And so then Teddy is just like, hey buddy, who are you? And like, what are you doing here? And so this guy is like mumbling. You can't really hear him and whatever, because we end up finding out that this guy is to be Gerard Butler's character, and this guy is to be Bob Verdick, who is to be this professional hitman that, of course, Teddy knows, uh, because like they know one another. So eventually, what ends up happening is Bob goes and is trying to offend the other guy in his cell who is obviously drunk. And Bob's not drunk whatsoever. He just smells like he is. And so all of a sudden, we have this other guy in his cell. And so Bob is to alert this guy and just be like, hey, you over there. And he's like, huh? And so Bob is just like, is that all you got? Huh? And then the guy's like, huh? It's like, oh, so like that's that's the one thing that you got on you. Like that's all you got to say. And then all of a sudden the guy says, what? And he's like, oh, you changed it up now. Now it's what? Like, so like Bob is going out of his way to just annoy this guy or to make him want to fight him. And so eventually this guy ends up getting annoyed that he ends up fighting Bob, but Bob, of course, just like basically just hurts this guy so badly that they desperately need to have somebody come in here. And so Bob is shouting like, hey, like my other cell person, he's hurt. Like he's injured, he can't breathe, he's having a seizure. Like, hey, somebody get help over here. Somebody get help. So uh Teddy is telling the guys, don't come in here. Don't do what he says. Like, he's tricking you. He's lying to you. And so not only does the sheriff have, like, he's kind of like, he's telling all his deputies what to do. He's making sure that work is going to get done a lot quicker. Because he's like, hey, when are you guys going to get certain, like, jobs done? Or why is it that all you guys are just, like, chatting like little betties, like you guys complain about overtime, but you guys are just sitting on your butts doing nothing. And so also we have the sheriff who ends up asking one of his men to be like, hey, like when are you gonna get something done that I asked of you? And the guy is like, well, I'm on it. And he's like, well, like I'd rather hear like you've got it done rather than you're on it, like, because you're on it is just a crappy saying. So like this sheriff is just kind of like throwing his weight around, so to speak. No offense to this guy. um but yeah, so eventually what ends up happening is we have Valerie, who is to actually seemingly be the medic of this place, because we have Valerie, who is to check on Teddy and find out that he's bleeding. Evidently, he had gotten shot. So Valerie is to sew up this guy's wound and then eventually just send him on to jail. So it's like, man, is it lucky that they coincidentally just have like a doctor in the house, so to speak, for whatever reason. And like I didn't really understand that at all. How all of a sudden we just have this like doctor uh, that all of a sudden just kind of comes out of nowhere. But anyways, uh, so we have the sheriff and we have the like doctor deputy girl who ends up trying to take care of this prisoner. So they end up going and trying to grab the other guy and taking him. And so the sheriff is just kind of doing some things. And so all of a sudden, Bob is to go and come from behind this guy and to take his like nightstick, knock this guy out, take his gun, and try to shoot Teddy. Teddy tries to jump from underneath his bed and yell out, "Hey, help me!" So he's trying to shoot me. So eventually, what ends up happening, because Bob can't kill Teddy anyways, eventually what ends up happening is they send more cops in there, and so Bob is to eventually get disarmed and then handcuffed to the cell because like I guess you're not really all that drunk now, are you? And Bob is like sober as a whistle, or sober like sober as can be. So eventually they end up finding out that the sheriff like had like his jaw disconnect or disjointed or whatever. So Valerie had to like pop it back in, and so yeah, so this guy couldn't talk very much. So eventually we end up like having to wait for the next thing to happen because we just have uh Valerie who is to just kind of start to question things about like, okay, why did this guy want to shoot you, this random guy that you shouldn't know? And so all of a sudden Valerie's asking really just Teddy questions. And we also have a moment that one of the deputies or one of the people in the sheriff's office is to eventually want fingerprints of Bobby's like in the records of things, but it isn't coming out weirdly. I guess so that way he can wipe out the record, so that way like Bobby isn't shown on this record thing. Because we have one cop who evidently is to be doing some shady things, and like he's messing with stuff of evidence and all kinds of things to try and uh, eventually be on the side of being a dirty cop, which we'll find out later in the film. So Valerie's asking eventually Teddy questions about like who is he, uh, like why is it seems like that this guy wanted to kill him for whatever reason, like what story do you have that would make anybody want to kill you for it? So Teddy eventually goes and is to say that um, he is to be this guy who is to like set up kills for people, and eventually it seemed that Teddy was to be a part of some high end kill that had something to do with the government, I believe, and so eventually Teddy was to eventually give up what he was doing and turned to the FBI. And so Teddy started turning in some of these people and like tried to like turn other people to turn in other people also. So eventually Teddy, because he was basically a snitch, all of a sudden we had people coming after him to just like, dude, we need to stop what he's doing because he's like turning in people. So F that guy, he's going to end up dead. So eventually we have Bob that is telling Teddy like, dude, do not tell her the truth about yourself. You've already ticked a lot of people off. Like you're eventually going to like want you dead. So we push on. So eventually, what happens is we end up having a guy named Anthony Lamb who comes into this police precinct, and he is to seemingly come as some balloon guy for someone's birthday. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. Like, we have this guy who's at this desk who is to kind of look at like affiliations or connections with either Bob or Teddy or whoever, and all of a sudden he's kind of thumbing through these photos, and he's like, "Hey, guy, like, look at this photo of you." The guy with the balloons is like, "Hey, like, do you have a relative or do you have like somebody that just looks like you?" And because this picture is like uncanny with you, and the guy is like, "Hey, what a coincidence!" As he shoots him in the head. Uh, the guy gets up after being weirdly shot in the head to then eventually fall over. And so coincidentally, the picture of Anthony has like blood over the same kind of spot that this guy was to be shot in the head. And Anthony is like, "Oh, what a coincidence." So all of a sudden, we start ending up having police officers that are starting to just appear within, like, after hearing these gunshots. Or really, I guess this guy had a silencer, but eventually, like, these police officers just start walking by and they're asking, like, "Hey, man, what the heck happened?" And he's like, "Hey, man, I'm just as confused as you are. Like, I just came in here and I'm dropping off balloons and I just see this guy dead." And then all of a sudden these guys' backs are turned because they believe this guy's story that he was going to call for help or whatever. But and so when their backs are turned, he ends up popping them and killing them off. And so eventually Anthony just kind of starts roaming through here and just kind of killing like the rest of these sheriff's men off. We end up having the dirty cop who ends up killing his own sheriff, and then eventually alliances himself with Anthony. And so we end up having Valerie, who is to eventually end up uh, spotting Anthony, because like eventually at this point now he's brought out this like gun that like spits out like tons and tons of bullets, where it seems like an armored piercing round kind of thing. So this is kind of clipping through like bulletproof glass pretty decently. So all of a sudden Valerie is trying to get back into this cell, and she ends up changing the code number of the cell while Anthony is just blasting away with his gun and like trying to blast through this bulletproof glass. So Valerie gets back into the door just in time because Anthony is to eventually make it through this bulletproof glass. And then so he ends up shooting through the door and making pretty decent dents on the door. But then eventually he has to get concerned because he's like, "Oh my god, like bullets will probably get ricocheted and they will probably hit me. Like maybe I should stop this." So accidentally Valerie is to accidentally shoot herself, and she's to start to bleed out. So she's kind of laying on the ground because she's like, "Oh my god, like I ricocheted a bullet off when I was to try to fire at this guy, and it hit me instead." So, because eventually they end up finding, like, both, like, Teddy and Bob are realizing that this girl is bleeding, because, like, and plus she also mentions that she's bleeding. And so, like, "Well, hey, how did you get hit?" And, like, "Well, I shot myself." Like, "Oh, okay." And then Bob has to explain it, because I guess Teddy couldn't figure it out. So, uh, so eventually Anthony is to make it through the door, and he's looking out the window, and so he ends up going and he ends up seeing Bob, and he's like, "Oh, hey, Bob, hey." Seems like old times. And so Bob is to just be like, "Oh, hey, Anthony Lamb, yeah, I know this guy." And so Bob is like, "Well, hey, Anthony." And so Anthony's like, "Well, I go by Tony now." And Bob is like, "I don't care. Like, I'm gonna just keep on calling him Anthony." And but he's like, "Well, I'm not gonna answer to that." It's like just this funny little banter back and forth, to where like Bob is like, "I don't care about you. Like, I don't care that you're just gonna come here and try to like kill Teddy off." And like we just have like both professionals that are just going for the same goal and whatever. So eventually Anthony is to supposedly like F off supposedly. And so now we have the one dirty cop trying to talk to Valerie, and I think his name is Hubbard. And so this guy ends up talking to Valerie, and Valerie's kind of confused why Hubbard didn't go and like say that he was still in the office anywhere, because Valerie had made a call out to anybody like numerous times if anybody is to be left to kind of come and help her because she's bleeding out. And so Hubbard's like, well, I didn't have my radio on, or some other kind of excuse that kind of just doesn't really sound right. So all of a sudden, Valerie is figuring out that this guy, for whatever reason, is to be a dirty cop. And like, there's something that seems too perfectly like working out right now that they have to get through this door. And so they're going to use a person that she knows to try to work that to eventually have this girl open this door to a person that she knows. So Valerie is like, you know what? I changed the code of this and I'm not going to tell you what it is, this door. And so eventually, what they decide to do, because eventually Valerie had figured this guy out, they're like, well, hey, we're going to get in here no matter what. And so they end up deciding to get the blueprint of the building to end up finding out that they can go and sledgehammer through some sidewall to eventually get in there, to get to Teddy, to kill him off. And then it'll probably just kill off everyone else who's left in there, because why not? So they go off to this wall, and we immediately have Bob, who is to naturally assume it's like, well, of course they're probably trying to figure out a way to get in here. And so then all of a sudden we hear like the sledgehammering smacks, and we start to see the wall buckling. But like, that's a slow but sure process. So we have Valerie, who's trying to do the best she can to like first aid her wound. But eventually the guys are just like, hey man, like, you're going to bleed out. Like, we should eventually like try to like just chuck us the keys, and we'll go and we'll get you some help. Or we're going to go and we'll kill these guys and we'll go get you some help. And Valerie's like, well, how do I know that you're really going to go and get me some help? How do I know that you're like, word is your bond, that the first thing you're going to do is try to help me? Like, I'm sure you guys, neither one of you care if I bleed out or not. So, but what happens anyways, because like basically like they can't just sit there, they just can't wait for them to eventually crack into this cell like room. So Teddy is to talk in such a way to gain Valerie's trust, and so she ends up tossing the keys to him. And so Teddy goes and is to eventually get out of the room, and the first thing that he ends up doing is like undoing his little man bun and going off to go and kill these guys. So coincidentally, there's other police officers who end up coming into where both Anthony and Hubbard are, and Anthony just ends up shooting them and killing them off. Hubbard knows one of them, and he's like, hey man, he's my friend, and like Anthony just ends up shooting him anyways. So Teddy eventually goes and finds these guys, and Anthony was, or I think Hubbard, I think one of them was to drop like kind of the one gun, and so Teddy easily and quickly picks that up and then starts to go after them. And so what finally ends up happening is Bob is to just easily go and uncuff himself from these cuffs and then walk out of where he is. And Valerie's like, "Hey, how did you do that?" And Bob's like, like I'm not gonna reveal how I did that because Bob is just magical. So Bob goes off, and so Bob is now eventually trying to get to these guys also. And so what ends up happening is Bob ends up finding Anthony, and it really just comes down to this like blade fight where where Anthony puts a blade through Bob's hand, and then Bob puts a blade through this guy's throat, and then all of a sudden Teddy arrives. And so Bob is to tell Teddy, like, "Hey, how about we go and we kill Anthony first, and then you and me can go. Like, you and me can go at this." So Teddy doesn't care. Teddy tries to shoot Bob. Bob tries to, like, basically vanish. And then Teddy kills Anthony anyways, shoots him dead, makes sure that he is dead. Uh, as well as the other, like, Hubbard guy is obviously dead also. So, because Bob goes and he basically, like, shoots him in the junk and then tasers the crap out of him and, like, kills him the most, like, in the worst possible way. So, uh, so now after seemingly most of the threats are gone and it's only just Teddy and Bob left, Teddy just goes off to this like little lunchroom and starts to grab certain meals and starts to eat them. And so all of a sudden we end up having Valerie coming from nowhere with this bulletproof vest on, and now she's just upset with Teddy. He's like, "Man, you took your sweet time, right? Like, I was bleeding out, and, like, you just decided to just go and eat a snack. Like, you son of a... Like, I thought you were going to come back for me, like you had said. Like, I set you free just for you to not really care." Like, so now Valerie is to really have the upper hand here, and she is to now, like, say that while she was making it out here, she ended up going and calling uh, like for assistance for like for them to help her here, and so help is coming in like 10 minutes from now, and so get ready for that. So and also Valerie is to get the gun from uh, her other police officer that she was like playing around with guns with, and uh, so one of her guys who is to be Pena, like they were playing around with their guns because they had the same kind of gun, and so eventually Valerie took Pena's gun because he's dead anyways, and so now she's holding up Teddy because like, "Hey man, you're not gonna get out of here. You're not gonna run away," because Bob was to tell Valerie it was a mistake to let Teddy get out of here because all that he'll care about is running away and running off. Like, he doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about anyone. He just cares about getting the heck out of here, and he only cares about his own skin. So he's just going to run off and get the heck out of here. So now all of a sudden we end up having Teddy, of course, trying to run yet again to eventually at seemingly every door or every corner to try to get to an escape. There's all of a sudden fire that emerges just everywhere. And so Teddy's like, dude, I can't figure out where the heck to get out of here. Like, he's trying to go through all these places and find these things. So eventually Valerie's chasing after him, and they're like having this shootout. Teddy eventually goes into this like armory section of this like this police station, and eventually ends up finding this like, I guess I would call it like a machine gun of sorts. And so he ends up like blasting Valerie, but he doesn't kill her. Like, so eventually, what ends up happening is that uh, it seems that uh, we have a FBI agent, which Valerie, Detective Schreier, what a goofy name, who, like, Valerie thinks that she can trust, but once this detective gets here, we end up finding out that that's not exactly true. Because what ends up happening is that Teddy is going to shoot Valerie, and then all of a sudden we end up having this detective who ends up going in and uh, and is to shoot Teddy, and then she was going to shoot Valerie, and then all of a sudden Bob comes in and like disarms this woman and kills her, and then goes back to drastically shoot Teddy and make sure that he's dead. And then the last thing we end up seeing is that, or for most of this movie, is that Bob is taking the little bag that Teddy had and is running off. And so Valerie's to mention that Bob had supposedly uh, also been working with this detective, this FBI agent, and Bob had said, yeah, like, I was working with her. So eventually he's to tell Valerie, it's like, hey, like, I'm gonna get out of here, like, but like, I'm gonna try and help you out. So like, Bob goes and he like tries to like pick her up and tries to like get her out of there, and gets her out to like an exit of this building. um but then he ends up going into an FBI uh car and driving the heck out of there. So eventually what ends up happening is that Valerie is to go into this ambulance and I guess get like sewn up or something like that to just kind of mitigate this whole bleeding. And so Valerie, I guess, is to get over the radio uh, being told that this car is still heading this direction. And so Valerie just decides to all of a sudden have the ambulance drivers just get out of this ambulance. And Valerie is just to put like IVs in and all kinds of things, and just drive this ambulance herself to try and chase after Bob. And she ends up calling, I guess, her husband to let her know, or let him know, that she's going to be putting in some overtime to go and chase after Bob. And so weirdly, we have both of these characters at the end of this that change the radio station to this one song, and then weirdly both of them are singing this song at the same time. And like, basically, I guess that's both of them just riding off into the sunset to, I guess, eventually tell us that there's going to be a Copshop 2, I'm assessing. That like, maybe it's going to be The Chase for Gerard Butler is going to be the sequel movie. But yeah, so that's all this movie really was. That's all I guess I really needed to say about this film. There's some bits of detail, like, really the whole story part I really didn't give a crap about, because like the story doesn't matter in this movie. It's just wait for the cool action, and wait for eventually this movie to give you the next piece of some kind of surprising puzzle, whichever, to you just be going, ooh. Like, that's all that this movie really is like the surprise of things. And that's pretty much it. So, with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.